Right. So page 11, just a little bit down the page, says 1-7 midpoints and bisectors. So at the end of last week, we talked about distance. And we've mentioned midpoints. A midpoint of a segment is the halfway point. It is equidistant from the end points. Equidistant just means equal distance or same distance. When we're working with just a number line, this is how we find the midpoint. Instead of minusing our x's to find the distance, we're going to add the x's and divide by 2. We're going to average those x's. So the midpoint on a number line is equal to the end point plus the other end point divided by 2. Endpoint plus endpoint divided by 2 when we're finding distance on a number line. Let's look at using this in a couple examples. Number 1, find the midpoint on a number line. What is the midpoint of xz? So to find my midpoint, we're going to take the values for the two x's, the two numbers, in this case it would be x and z. We're going to add those together, so -3 plus 8, and we're going to divide that by 2. What is -3 plus 8? 5. Does 5 divided by 2 come out to be a whole number? What does it come out to be? 2.5 is our midpoint. So let's go ahead and graph that, add that to our number line. 2.5 right here would be our midpoint. Take a moment and do part B on your own. I want you guys to find the midpoint on part B. Take about 1 minute. Yep, that's absolutely correct. Nice work. Yes. The 2 is part of our formula because we're averaging these two to find the middle of something. You add them together and then you always cut it in half if you have two things. Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Well, is it going to matter if I do A and F or F and E?
Does not matter. That's a great question. Just like when we were doing distance where it didn't matter which order you did the numbers in, when we're finding the midpoint, it does not matter which order you do the numbers in. So it doesn't matter whether you do -5 plus 7 or 7 plus -5. You're going to end up with the exact same answer either way. What did you guys find the midpoint on part B to be? 1. -5 plus 7 is 2. We have 2 divided by 2. That comes out to 1. So here's our midpoint. That means that from A over to this midpoint is exactly the same size as the midpoint over to F. So I'm going to mark those as congruent. This is my midpoint. All right, let's look at this in A real world scenario says a pony works at a vintage clothing store. She wants to hang a new sign so it's centered above the dressing room doors. Given that the dressing room doors have the same width, find the point along the wall that a pony should hang the new sign. And then we've got this picture to look at over here. So we basically have a number line. They don't show the line part, but they are giving us the distances here. We're told that this is 0. This, our x1, is 7.5. And this is our x2 at 13.5. And we want to find the location that we would need to put the doors at. So we want halfway between these 2 points. So to find our midpoint, we're going to add our 2 x's together, x1 and x2. So I'm going to add 7.5 and 13.5 together. And then I'll divide by 2. What is 7.5 plus 13.5? 21. And 21 divided by 2 is 10.5. Now in this case, do I need to put units with it with a story problem? Yes. What kind of units should I put with that? Feet. So at 10.5 feet along the wall is where she needs to hang this sign. Let's go ahead and flip to the next page. We'll do one more like this. So number 3 up at the top. Jorge travels from his school on 38th Street to the library on 62nd. He stops halfway there to take a break. Where does Jorge stop to rest? Just like we did on part B on number 1, I want you guys to take about a minute and find where he is going to stop to take his rest. School's on 38th Street. Library's on 62nd Street. Where is the halfway point for him to take his rest? Where should he stop? Yes. 50th Street, yes. We're going to find our midpoint by adding 38, 62 together, and cutting that in half. 38 plus 62 is 100, and half of 100 is 50. So he's going to stop at 50th Street. So right here is the midpoint. Very nice. Very nice. All right, so that's finding the midpoint on a number line. Similar to what we did with distance, we're now going to move into finding the midpoint when I'm on an XY axis, when I have an ordered pair, both an X and a Y. And it's very similar to finding the midpoint on a number line. To find the midpoint when I have X's and Y's, we're going to do exactly the same thing for the X's. We're going to add the X's together, and we're going to divide by 2. And then we'll follow that same process for our Y's. We will add the Y parts of each ordered pair together, and we will divide by 2. Let's try this in an example. Down at the bottom of the page, we're looking at example number 4 now. We want to find the coordinates of point M, which is the midpoint of segment AB. They did not give me a picture to look at this time. So I'm going to draw a picture. I know it's not going to be precise. That's okay. My point A is at -2, 1. My point B is at 8, 3. We are trying to find the midpoint, point M. So to find M, I have my ordered pair here. We're going to take our x's. Here's my x1. Here's my x2, the x from each ordered pair. We're going to take those and we're going to add them together. So I've got -2 plus 8. And then we're going to do the exact same thing, but with the y parts of each ordered pair. So I'm going to take y1, which is 1, and I'm going to add that to the y2, which is 3, and then we'll cut that in half. We'll divide by 2. What is -2 plus 8? 6. So I have 6 in the numerator and 2 in the denominator for the x part of my ordered pair for my midpoint. And then I have 1 plus 3 on the y part. What is 1 plus 3? 4. I have 4 over 2 for the y part of my ordered pair. And now I'm going to simplify both of those. What is 6 divided by 2? 3. And 4 divided by 2? So my midpoint M is an ordered pair of 3, 2. If M is at 3, 2, then segment AM will be congruent to segment MB, because this is the midpoint. I would like you guys to try that process before we go on and look at anything else. So try part B, draw a picture first, and then find the midpoint for segment AC. What are the first numbers that we need to add together in this first numerator to find point B? Yep, -3 plus 5. What is -3 plus 5? 2. So I have 2 over 2 in the x spot. So what is the x part of the ordered pair for our point B? 1. And then we do the same thing, but for the y's. What are the two numbers that we add together for the y's? -2 plus 10. What is -2 plus 10? 8. So I have 8 over 2, and 8 over 2 is 4. So here's my midpoint. creating two congruent smaller segments. When you guys are doing this on your homework, I don't necessarily have to see this middle piece right here. If you write down the pieces that are being added together and divided, and then you go from here right to an answer, I would be okay with that, because I know some people will do this part in their heads and go right to the answer. That's perfectly fine. I don't have to see that in-between step. All right, let's flip the page over. Let's go look at page 13. All right, the midpoint of any two values when I'm on a number line, we're adding the x's, x1 plus x2, and cutting it in half. Or you could look at this as endpoint plus endpoint divided by 2. That's what we mean when we say we're doing x1 plus x2. Midpoint formula, when we have xy points, x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Let's find point C. What do I need to do to find the x part of the ordered pair for my point C? -5 plus 2. That's my x1 and my x2. So -5 plus 2. What do I need to do to find y? 3 plus -8, because that's my y2 over there. Close my parentheses up. -5 plus 2 is what? -3. So -3 over 2. And then 3 plus -8? -5 over 2. So what would this ordered pair be in decimal form? For the y part, it'd be -2.5. What about for the x part? What is -3 divided by 2? -1.5. So -1.5, -2.5 would be my ordered pair here. Very nicely done. All right. Number 6, I'm going to pass out some straight edges, but I would like for you guys to start off by graphing the 2 points that they have described there. So graph point K, graph point O. Once you have a straight edge, please go ahead and connect those two to make a line segment. You're welcome. You're welcome. All right, everybody should now have a straight edge. You're quite welcome. Point K is at -6, 10. So right up here. Point O is at 2, -7. So right down here. Now, one thing I want to point out, when we drew lines the first couple days of school. We had to make sure to go beyond the endpoints. Are we drawing a line or a line segment this time? A line segment. This notation right here tells me I'm drawing a segment. So this time I do not want to go past those endpoints. I want to go dot to dot because it is a line segment. I do not want to go past those endpoints. It also says right up here that we are supposed to find KO, and there's nothing over the top of it. So what are they asking me to find here? I drew my line segment. Close. I don't want to find the midpoint. That's not what KO is, although we are going to go and find the midpoint later. I want to know right here, this part of the directions, because it says graph KO. That's what we just did here. But then it says find KO. What about the whole line segment? I'm looking for a word that starts with a D that we learned about last week. The distance. So find the distance or the length of segment KO. So that's the very first thing that they're asking me to do on this problem, is to find that distance. Distance is equal to, what is my distance formula? Big ol' square root. Absolutely, that's where we start. What next? x2 minus x1 inside parentheses. And then what do I do to that? Square it. Plus y2 minus y1. Close the parentheses and square it. So I have to pick one of these points, either K or O, to be my point 1, and the other one to be my point 2. K was up here at negative 610. O is down here at 2, negative 7. Which one do you want to be point number 1? K or O? Negative 6, make that our x1, y1. We can absolutely do that. And so then point O would be my x2, y2. All right, let's substitute in now. We're going to find the distance from K to O. So KO equals big long square root here. Inside the first set of parentheses, I do x2 minus x1. What is my x2? 2, yes. So I have 2 minus, and now I need my x1. What is my x1? Negative 6. So 2 minus negative 6. What's going to happen there where I minus that negative? It's going to turn into a positive. So this right here, because it's minus a negative, that becomes a plus. All right, next set of parentheses. Now we're looking at the y's. What is my y2? Negative 7 minus my y1, which is? Y1 is positive 10. So negative 7 minus 10. And then close the parentheses and square it. All right, let's simplify each of these parentheses and then we'll put it into our calculators. 2 minus negative 6 became 2 plus 6. What is 2 plus 6? 8. So I have 8 squared plus negative 7 minus 10, negative 17. Close the parentheses and square it. If you had flipped around which one you called point 1 and which one you called point 2, so that your ordered pairs were all exactly backwards from mine, you would have gotten a -8 here and a +17 here. But it comes out to be the same thing when we square it. I want you guys to go ahead and pop this into your calculator. If you need to grab one, please feel free. Yes.
I don't know how to do that.
So you're just going to add an extra set of parentheses. So on yours, when you go to put it in after you do your square root sign, you'll have 2 parentheses and then 8, close one and square it, plus, and then parentheses, -17, close them, square it, and then close the other set of parentheses. Is that a squared or is that a 2? I can't tell.
That's just squared.
Okay. Oh, you forgot to square the 8. That's what happened. I think you can stick that in there. When you guys pop this into your calculator, before you turn it into decimal form, what's underneath the radical? How much? 353. And then you change it into its decimal form by hitting which button on the calculator? The arrows right above the enter key. So after you hit enter and you see that radical 353 show up on the screen, you push this button next. This has to be the very next button you push after you put this in your calculator and hit enter. And what do you get? 18.788. Absolutely correct. All right, so now we know that this whole distance right here is 18.788. Let's keep moving on in the problem. It says label the points, round your answers to the nearest hundredth. Oh, I missed this part up here. Find and label the midpoint M. How do I find the midpoint? X1 plus X2, so my X1 was -6. We're going to add to that my X2. X2 was 2. So -6 plus 2 over 2. So notice with the distance formula, we minus things. With the midpoint formula, we plus them. Distance you minus, midpoint you plus. All right, how do I find the y part of the ordered pair for the midpoint? (10 plus -7) divided by 2. All right, let's start off with the x's. What is -6 plus 2? -4, so I have -4 over 2 for the x part. And then I have 10 plus -7. What is 10 plus -7? 3 over 2. What is -4 divided by 2? -2. And 3 divided by 2? 1.5. Okay, so here's our midpoint. We're going to add that to our graph. -2, 1.5. Right about here is my midpoint M. Because this is the midpoint, what's it doing to my line segment KO? It's dividing it in half. It's cutting it exactly in half. So what's true about KM and MO? They're the same. They are congruent. Let's go ahead and mark those as congruent. And there's one last piece to this problem, and then we're going to stop. The last thing that they ask me to find is this. MO, and there's nothing over the top of it. So what are they asking me to find when there's nothing over the top of it like that? The distance or length. So I've got two choices here. I have a short way that I could find this answer, or I have a long way that I could find this answer. The long way is using my distance formula all over again, only using it with point M and point O. But what did we say about these two segments? They're congruent, and they're exactly how much of this whole thing? They're exactly half. I know how big the whole thing is. The whole thing is 18.788. Divide that by 2. Segment MO is equal to 18.788 divided by 2. 9 point, and then I didn't hear the decimals, I'm sorry. 394. Absolutely correct. That was a lot of ideas all pulled together in one problem. We found distance, we found our midpoint, and we used the idea of congruent segments, dividing up our large segment into smaller pieces of equal size. The homework that you guys grabbed on your way in the door is due on Wednesday. Homework is due on Wednesday. On the homework, the stuff that you can do right now, you can do almost the entire front page. Leave the bottom 3 problems. Don't do 33, 34, 35 yet. We haven't done an example like that. You can do number 53. And the rest of the problems we will learn how to do tomorrow. So these are the ones that you can do with what we've covered in class today so far. The rest of the problems you will learn how to do tomorrow in class. We'll do some examples like that. An outlook for the rest of the week. Tomorrow, we are going to finish up everything in Module 1. Everything in Module 1 will be done, and we will begin reviewing for your test on Friday this Wednesday. So Wednesday you have homework due. Wednesday we'll start reviewing for your test. Wednesday will also be the day of skills check number 2. So that we'll get another chance to check in and see how you're doing with the distance and the midpoint stuff. The first skills check should give you an idea of how well you understood the first part. If you were struggling with that, I stay after school today. I stay after school on Wednesday also for you to receive extra help. I will pass out a test review on Wednesday, and then you guys will turn that in on Friday for points.